He came home after 7 years, but the child who walked through that door was not the same. Stephen Stayner, the abducted child, came back. Stephen Stayner was only 7 years old when he disappeared on his way home from school in California. For years, his family lived with questions that had no answers. There were no witnesses, no clear leads, only waiting. When Stephen finally returned, the world called it a miracle. A child who had been missing for 7 years had found his way home. But returning was not the same as being saved, and coming home did not mean the story was over. Stephen Stayner was 7 years old when he disappeared in Merced, California. It was an ordinary school day, the kind that leaves no mark in memory until something goes wrong. That afternoon, Stephen was walking home alone along a route he knew well. The streets were quiet, familiar, unremarkable. There was nothing about that moment that suggested danger. This was not a child running away. There was no plan, no rebellion, no intention to vanish. Stephen was simply doing what he had done many times before, walking home. Somewhere along that short distance, everything changed. A man approached him. He did not grab Stephen or shout at him. Instead, he spoke calmly, like someone who belonged there. He told Stephen that his family did not want him anymore, that they had given him away, and that he now belonged somewhere else. For a 7-year-old child, those words were not just confusing, they were overwhelming. Stephen did not have the language to question them or the power to resist them. Within minutes, the life he knew was gone. When Stephen did not come home that evening, his absence was noticed quickly. Searches began and questions were asked, but there were no witnesses who could explain what had happened and no clear direction to follow. Days passed, then weeks, and eventually years. Stephen Stayner had vanished, not into darkness, but into silence. And that silence would last for nearly 7 years. Stephen Stayner was taken, but he was not locked away behind bars or chains. There were no visible restraints, no closed doors that could not be opened. What kept him there was something far more powerful than force. Kenneth Parnell understood exactly who he was dealing with. A frightened child who trusted adults and depended on them to explain the world. From the beginning, he filled Stephen's mind with carefully chosen lies. He told him that his family had abandoned him, that they no longer wanted him, and that trying to return home would only make things worse. Parnell warned Stephen that if he tried to escape, his family would be punished. He said they would be hurt or taken away. For a 7-year-old, these were not empty threats. They became rules, unspoken boundaries that Stephen learned not to cross. Over time, Stephen was given a new identity and a new life that did not belong to him. He was introduced to others as a boy who had no family, no past, and nowhere else to go. The longer he stayed, the more dangerous the truth became. Leaving no longer felt like an option. It felt like a risk no child could afford to take. Stephen learned how to survive by adapting. He listened, he obeyed, he stayed quiet. This was not acceptance. It was self-preservation. Each day he remained silent was another day he believed he was protecting the people he loved. From the outside, nothing appeared wrong. Parnell did not hide Stephen in a basement or keep him out of sight. He moved through ordinary places, among ordinary people, without raising alarm. And because there were no visible signs of captivity, no one asked the questions that might have saved Stephen sooner. As the years passed, Stephen's childhood slowly disappeared. School, Friends, routines, all the things that shape a child's sense of self were taken from him. In their place was fear, confusion, and a constant effort to avoid making the wrong choice. Stephen was not chained to a room. He was chained to a belief that leaving would destroy the only family he thought he had left. And for years, that belief kept him exactly where his captor wanted him. The years passed quietly, and childhood slowly disappeared. The years that followed did not pass all at once. They moved slowly, quietly, one day at a time. Stephen grew older, but nothing about his life resembled a childhood. He was not enrolled in school. He did not have classmates, teachers, or routines that marked the passage of time. There were no birthdays celebrated openly, no milestones acknowledged, no sense of progress. Instead, life became a series of instructions: where to go, what to say, and most importantly, what not to reveal. Stephen and Kenneth Parnell moved frequently. New places, new faces, and new stories were introduced whenever questions began to form. Each move reinforced the same message: stability was dangerous, and silence was necessary. The world outside continued as normal, while Stephen remained suspended inside a life that was not his own. As the years passed, Stephen learned how to blend in without belonging. He spoke when spoken to, answered questions carefully, and avoided drawing attention to himself. Survival depended on reading moods, anticipating consequences, and never appearing uncertain. These were not skills a child should have to learn, but they became essential. Gradually, Stephen stopped thinking in terms of escape, not because he no longer wanted to go home, but because the idea itself had become blurred. Home existed only as fragments, memories that grew less clear with time. The longer he stayed, the more distant his former life felt, until it seemed almost unreal. Fear did not always arrive as panic. Often, it settled in as routine. Waking up, following instructions, staying quiet, these actions became normal. What once felt wrong slowly began to feel unavoidable. This was how control worked, not through constant violence, but through repetition and uncertainty. Stephen was growing into a teenager, but without the freedom to make choices or the safety to make mistakes. His identity remained frozen, shaped by someone else's rules and expectations. Childhood was not taken in a single moment. It was erased gradually, year by year. By the time Stephen was 14, he had spent half of his life under this control. The silence that surrounded him had become familiar, almost protective. Speaking out felt more dangerous than staying. But that fragile balance was about to be broken, and the moment that changed everything did not begin with Stephen himself. It began with another child. Stephen survived in silence until someone else needed saving. In early 1980, the pattern that had controlled Stephen's life for years began to shift. Kenneth Parnell brought another child into the picture, a 5-year-old boy named Timmy White. For Stephen, the moment was unmistakable. The lies, the promises, the warnings, they were the same ones he had heard years earlier. Only now, he was old enough to recognize them for what they were. Everything that had once confused him now appeared painfully clear. Stephen watched as Timmy was told that his family no longer wanted him, that he belonged somewhere else now, that obedience was the only way to stay safe. Hearing those words again, spoken to someone younger and more vulnerable, forced Stephen to confront a truth he had been avoiding. This time, silence no longer felt like protection. Stephen understood what waiting meant. He knew how years could disappear quietly, how a childhood could fade without leaving visible marks. What had happened to him was about to happen to Timmy, unless someone intervened. For the first time in years, Stephen faced a choice. Staying meant survival, but it also meant complicity. Leaving meant danger, not just for himself, but for the people he loved. The fear that had kept him silent now collided with something stronger: responsibility. Stephen was no longer only thinking about escape, he was thinking about rescue. He began to imagine a future where Timmy did not have to grow up the way he had, where one child's silence did not condemn another to the same fate. That realization changed everything. The balance that had held for so long began to crack. The rules no longer made sense. The warnings lost their power. What had once felt impossible now felt necessary. Stephen was 14 years old when he made the decision that would define the rest of his life. And that decision would lead to the moment no one expected, a quiet escape that would finally bring the truth into the open. The escape did not happen suddenly, and it did not look like an act of rebellion. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, no moment of violence. What Stephen did was quiet, deliberate, and carefully measured. Stephen did not run alone. He took Timmy with him. Leaving meant stepping into uncertainty, but staying meant allowing the cycle to continue. Stephen understood that if he walked away by himself, Timmy would remain behind, vulnerable to the same years of silence and fear. Freedom, in that moment, was no longer something he could claim for himself alone. Instead of going directly to the police, Stephen sought help from an adult he believed would listen. That choice reflected years of conditioning. Trust had to be earned, and authority had often been presented as dangerous. Even in escape, caution guided every step. When authorities were finally contacted, the truth emerged slowly. Names were spoken, stories were compared. The pieces that had been missing for years began to align. Stephen Stayner was no longer a rumor or a memory. He was real, present, and finally heard. Kenneth Parnell was taken into custody. The control he had maintained through fear and manipulation collapsed in a matter of hours. What had taken years to build fell apart once the silence was broken. For Stephen, the escape did not feel like victory. It felt unreal. The world he had imagined from a distance was suddenly surrounding him, asking questions he was not prepared to answer. The attention came quickly, and it did not fade. Stephen was 14 years old when he walked out of captivity, holding another child's hand. His freedom came not from running faster or fighting harder, but from choosing to act when silence was no longer an option. The boy who had once been taken without a voice had returned, not just to save himself, but to save someone else. And yet, the hardest part of the journey was still ahead. Stephen Stayner returned home after nearly 7 years away. The house was still standing. The streets were familiar. His family was there, waiting. From the outside, it looked like an ending, the kind people hope for when a child goes missing. The reunion was emotional and overwhelming. For Stephen's family, the return felt like a miracle. For the public, it became a story of survival, a child who had disappeared and somehow found his way back. But coming home did not mean returning to who he had been. Stephen was no longer the 7-year-old boy who would walk to school one winter morning. He came back older, quieter, and shaped by years of fear and control. The world expected gratitude, relief, and closure. What Stephen felt instead was confusion, distance, and pressure he did not know how to carry. Media attention arrived quickly. Cameras followed him. Interviews were requested. His face became recognizable to strangers who believed they knew his story. He was praised as a hero, celebrated for his bravery, and asked to relive his experiences again and again. There was little space for silence and even less room to process what had happened. Support was limited. Trauma was not yet understood the way it is today, and Stephen was expected to adjust, to move forward, and to be grateful for his return. But healing does not follow a schedule, and recovery cannot be rushed. Stephen struggled to find his place in a life that had continued without him. The years he had lost could not be replaced, and the person he had become did not easily fit into the world he had left behind. Freedom, it turned out, did not erase the past. It only revealed how deeply it remained. Stephen Stayner had come home. But home did not bring peace, and survival did not mean the story was over. For some children, being found is only the beginning. Stephen Stayner's story is not remembered only because he escaped. It endures because it challenges a simple belief that returning home is the same as being saved. Some children come back, but what they carry with them does not disappear at the door. This is why their stories matter, and why they continue to echo. Next on True Echoes. Stephen Stayner came home after 7 years, but some children return without ever knowing they were taken. Carlina White was abducted as a newborn, taken from a hospital before she had a name of her own. She grew up believing a story that was never hers. Decades later, the truth surfaced, not through rescue, but through identity. This is the story of Carlina White and a return that began with a question: who am I? Missing Persons Who Return Home continues. The truth coming soon on True Echoes. Stephen was not hidden behind walls or locked doors. He was hidden by belief, fear, and the absence of questions. What do you think allowed this crime to go unnoticed for so many years? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. And step into the echoes of truth. To be continued.